What if you tried to track down the richest people in a nation's history, only to find out they had all vanished? We wanted to create a list of the 10 richest Jewish family businesses in Barbados, the families who helped build a sugar empire and amassed fortunes that would be worth billions today. But what we found instead was a ghost story. A story of immense wealth and influence that disappeared so completely, it's almost like it was never there. So the question isn't who were the richest families, it's where did their fortunes and their legacies go? In this video, we uncover the forgotten history of the Sephardic Jews of Barbados and the mysterious collapse of their island empire. Our investigation started with a simple idea: identify the 10 wealthiest Jewish families in Barbados. It sounds like a list you'd find in a business magazine. We imagined sprawling estates and generations-old companies, names that were synonymous with the island's commerce. After all, historical accounts are full of mentions of the huge economic impact the Jewish community had on this Caribbean jewel. They were, by many accounts, key architects of its most profitable industry. So, where are they now? The search began, and right away we hit a wall. There was no list. Not a current one, and more surprisingly, not a historical one. We found no clear rankings, no neatly kept ledgers of the top 10 or even the top 5. The names existed, scattered across wills and synagogue records, but they were like echoes in an empty room. Families like the de Mercados, the Piñeros, and the da Costas are whispered about in historical texts, their wealth mentioned but never really quantified like a modern rich list. This wasn't just a lack of records, it was an absence. The immense fortunes built on sugar and trade, the very fortunes that helped transform Barbados into a global powerhouse, had seemingly evaporated from the island. The families who held this wealth were just gone. It became clear our straightforward listicle was impossible, but in that impossibility, a much more interesting story began to surface. The real story wasn't about ranking who was the richest, but about why their wealth was so fragile. It's the story of a community that helped build an empire from which they were often excluded. They were an engine of prosperity, but were rarely allowed to own the machine. They generated billions in value, but were largely barred from owning the land that produced it. This wasn't a story of fortunes lost to bad investments. It was the story of a fortune that was never allowed to truly take root. The mystery wasn't in ranking the wealth, but in uncovering the forces that created it, constrained it, and ultimately caused it to vanish. Our investigation had pivoted. We weren't making a list anymore. We were hunting for the ghosts of a lost empire. Number 1. The first ghost, the Sephardic Golden Age. To understand what was lost, we have to understand what was built. And to do that, we need to go back in time, not to Barbados, but to Brazil in the mid-1600s. The story of Barbadian Jewish wealth begins, funnily enough, with persecution. In Dutch Brazil, around Recife, a thriving Sephardic Jewish community had established itself after fleeing the Inquisition in Spain and Portugal. They were merchants, innovators, and, most importantly, experts in the sugarcane industry. They had refined the complex process of turning sweet grass into crystalline gold. But their safety didn't last. In 1654, the Portuguese recaptured the territory from the Dutch and brought the Inquisition with them. Once again, the Jewish community was forced to flee, scattering across the Atlantic to places like Amsterdam, London, and the New World. It's here, in this moment of crisis, that the story of Barbados truly begins. A small group of these refugees made their way to the young English colony. The English had claimed Barbados a few decades earlier, in 1627, and were struggling to find a profitable cash crop. The arrival of Sephardic Jews from Brazil was a key spark that helped ignite an economic firestorm. They didn't just bring their families, they brought knowledge. They carried with them the secrets of the sugar trade, an intricate understanding of cultivation and revolutionary technology. The English planters had the land, but the Jewish refugees had the formula to unlock its immense potential. This was the start of the Sugar Revolution, a period of such rapid change that it altered the island's economy, landscape, and society forever. Barbados, which had been a modest colonial outpost, was about to become the richest colony in the English Empire, and it was all built on sugar. The Sephardic community, which grew steadily through the late 17th century, was at the heart of this revolution. They weren't just participants, they were catalysts. They advised on planting techniques and used their trade networks, especially with Dutch merchants, to finance operations and ship the final product to Europe. By 1679, the Jewish population on the island had grown to an estimated 300 people, a small but powerful minority. They established communities in the capital, Bridgetown, and in the northern town of Speightstown. In 1654, the same year the refugees arrived, the Nide Israel Synagogue was founded in Bridgetown, making it among the earliest known surviving synagogues in the Americas. This was the Golden Age. Fortunes were being made at a breathtaking pace, turning Barbados into a landscape of sprawling plantations. Grand mansions known as great houses began to dot the island. But as we'll see, the hands that built this world were often forbidden from owning a piece of it. The Sephardic Jews were creating an empire of sugar, but they were building it on land that could rarely be theirs. This was the core contradiction of their lives in Barbados, and it holds the first major clue to their vanished fortunes.
Number 2. The Architects of an Empire, the Demercado Legacy. At the heart of the sugar revolution, there's one family and one man whose contribution was a game-changer: David Raphael Demercado. He was among the Sephardic Jews who arrived from Brazil in 1654. His father, Dr. Abraham Demercado, carried a letter of safe passage from Oliver Cromwell, allowing the Jewish refugees to settle on the island. But David Raphael brought something just as valuable, an idea that would literally reshape Barbados. Before the Brazilians arrived, processing sugarcane was slow and inefficient. The tough stalks had to be crushed to extract the juice, usually with animal or human power. It was a bottleneck for the whole industry. David Demercado had helped develop a revolutionary new mechanism in Brazil. He'd figured out how to adapt the design of a Dutch windmill, turning it into a powerful sugar crushing factory. By using a series of rollers in the windmill's gears, the power of the trade winds could be harnessed to crush huge amounts of cane with incredible speed. The impact was immediate and explosive. Demercado's windmill technology was the key that unlocked mass production. Plantations could now process far more cane, dramatically increasing their sugar output. This efficiency also led to another hugely profitable industry: the distillation of rum from leftover molasses. The Demercado invention didn't just make the sugar industry bigger, it made it more profitable. Suddenly, the skyline of Barbados began to change. Windmills based on this new technology sprang up across the island. At its peak, some say Barbados had one of the highest concentrations of windmills in the world, with over 400 dotting the countryside. Each one was a testament to Demercado's ingenuity. The iconic image of a Barbadian windmill is a direct descendant of his family's contribution. David Raphael Demercado died in 1658, only 4 years after arriving. He didn't live to see the staggering consequences of his invention. Yet his family's name is etched into history as prime architects of the sugar empire. But here we find another piece of the puzzle. The Demercado family's wealth came from technology and expertise, from intellectual property. And while they surely profited, their story highlights the specific role the Jewish community often played. They were the innovators and financiers. They were the essential lubricant for the engine of commerce. However, the engine itself, the vast plantations, the land, remained almost exclusively in the hands of the British plantocracy. This distinction is everything. It's the difference between owning the factory and licensing the patent for the machines inside. Both can make you rich, but only one gives you permanent, immovable wealth. The Demercado legacy, as monumental as it was ultimately tied to knowledge, not to the soil of Barbados itself. Number 3. The Golden Cage, Wealth and Restriction. The Sephardic community of 17th and 18th century Barbados lived a life of contradiction. On one hand, they were incredibly successful. Their expertise was sought after, and their financial skills were a driving force in the island's prosperity. On the other, they were tangled in a web of discriminatory laws and social prejudices. They lived in a golden cage, able to generate fortunes, but unable to enjoy the full rights that should have come with them. The British colonial government and English merchants had a complicated relationship with the Jewish settlers. They knew they were useful, but success bred resentment. British merchants accused their Jewish counterparts of illegal practices, mainly of trading more with the Dutch than the English. This jealousy led to oppressive laws designed to clip the wings of the Jewish economy. A series of laws placed heavy restrictions and special taxes on Jewish businesses. Jews were forbidden from employing Christians, and in a particularly telling restriction from 1688, they were limited in the number of enslaved people they could own, with some sources citing a cap of just 3. But the most significant restriction concerned land. By the time Jewish settlers arrived in large numbers, most of the arable land on the small island was already owned by the English. This situation was reinforced by laws that, as commonly cited, limited Jews to owning no more than just a few acres of land. This single fact is key. In the 17th and 18th centuries, real wealth was land. The British plantocracy built their dynasties on vast sugar plantations, their fortunes literally rooted in the soil. This land was passed down through generations, a permanent asset that conferred wealth, status, and political power. Barred from this primary source of colonial wealth, Jewish families had to build their fortunes differently. They became the island's premier merchants, traders, and financiers. Their world was the bustling port and the shops on Swan Street, which for centuries was known as Jew Street because of the concentration of Jewish-owned businesses. While they were concentrated in Bridgetown, there's little evidence it was a legally segregated ghetto in the European sense. There were, of course, a few exceptions. Records from the early 20th century show that Jacob da Costa and Abraham Rodriguez Brandon did own plantations and the enslaved people who worked them. But these were outliers. The vast majority of the community's wealth was liquid and mercantile, based on goods, credit, and ships moving across the ocean. This had profound consequences. It made the Jewish community successful, but also vulnerable. Land is permanent. A plantation remains even if sugar prices fall. A business, however, relies on open markets and stable politics. The wealth of the Barbadian Jews, for all its glitter, wasn't anchored to the island. It was a fortune built on the shifting sands of commerce, not the solid rock of land. And eventually, it would have to be moved.
Number 4. The vanishing, the decline and disappearance. For nearly 2 centuries, the Jewish community of Barbados navigated their golden cage. They flourished, reaching a peak population of around 800 people by the mid-18th century. By the early 19th century, most discriminatory laws were repealed, and by 1820, they were granted full political rights. It seemed like a new era of stability was beginning, but ironically, just as they achieved equality, their world started to crumble. A series of devastating blows, both natural and economic, would unravel their 200-year-old legacy. The first blow came from the sky. On August 10, 1831, Barbados was struck by one of the most destructive hurricanes in its history. The storm leveled Bridgetown, and some 1,500 people lost their lives. The island's economy was shattered. Among the buildings turned to rubble was the Nidhe Israel Synagogue, the community's spiritual heart for 180 years. The community rallied to rebuild, and a new synagogue stood by 1833. But the hurricane, combined with falling sugar prices and competition from other colonies, had wounded the island's economy deeply. The fortunes of the Jewish merchants, so tied to the sugar trade, suffered right along with it. This economic decline was compounded by social change. With their prospects dimming, many Jewish families began looking for opportunities elsewhere. The liquid nature of their wealth, once a product of restriction, now made it easier for them to leave. Unlike the planters whose fortunes were tied up in land, the Jewish merchants could pack up their assets and emigrate. They left for London, Philadelphia, and other more prosperous colonies. The decline was a demographic death by 1,000 departures. The vibrant community of 800 had shrunk dramatically. In 1848, only 91 Jews were recorded on the island.
By 1869, the magnificent Nidhe Israel Synagogue had just 8 contributing members. The records paint a sad picture of a community fading away. The final chapter is a quiet one. The once thriving communities withered, the great trading houses closed. Finally, in 1929, the end came. The last practicing descendant of the original Brazilian settlers, a man named Edmund Baiza, could no longer maintain the synagogue and sold the building. With that, the organized Sephardic Jewish congregation in Barbados ceased to exist. Their immense fortunes vanished with them. It wasn't lost in a single cataclysm, it simply moved. The wealth, which had never been allowed to fully anchor in the island's soil, was uprooted and replanted elsewhere. Facing economic collapse, the families took their capital and expertise and followed the path of opportunity, just as their ancestors had done. The mystery of the lost Jewish fortunes isn't a mystery of disappearance, but one of displacement. The island was left with the ghosts of their wealth, silent windmills, grand plantations they had financed but never owned, and a beautiful synagogue that now stood empty. Number 5. The Second Echo, a new beginning. Just when the story seemed over, a new chapter began. The end of the organized Sephardic Jewish community in 1929 was not the end of the Jewish story on the island. A second, distinct wave of Jewish immigration would arrive, creating a new community from the ashes of the old, the Ashkenazi Jews. In the 1930s, as Nazism cast its shadow over Europe, a new generation of Jewish refugees sought sanctuary. Once again, Barbados became a haven. The story of this new community often begins with one man, Moses Altman. In 1932, he left Poland and made his way to Barbados. Over the next few years, dozens of other Jewish families, mostly from Eastern Europe, followed, escaping the horrors that were about to consume the continent. These Ashkenazi settlers had a very different experience. They didn't arrive with revolutionary technology or sugar industry connections. They arrived with what they could carry, seeking safety and a chance to build a new life from scratch. Many started as humble peddlers, walking through rural parishes selling goods door to door. The story of the Altman family shows this entrepreneurial spirit. Joe Altman, for example, started as a peddler and was determined to open his own store. Lacking capital, he found support from a local Barbadian businessman, Harcourt Carter, who generously funded his dream. Around 1936, Altman opened a shop in Bridgetown, and after the war, he and his wife Sarah opened a successful enterprise called the Modern Dress Shop. This was the pattern for many of the new families. They built lives and businesses in retail, establishing shops that became fixtures in Bridgetown. Theirs was a more local form of commerce. They built a close-knit community, with Moses Altman hosting services in his own home. And yet, this new community lived in the shadow of the one that came before. They had no synagogue, as the Nidhe Israel building was being used as offices. It wasn't until the 1980s that a concerted effort led by Moses Altman's son and grandson, Henry and Sir Paul Altman, began to reclaim this history. They successfully petitioned the government to return the dilapidated building to the Jewish community. The restoration of the Nidhe Israel Synagogue was a massive project, culminating in its rededication in 1987. It was a powerful moment, connecting the new Ashkenazi community with the lost legacy of their Sephardic brethren. Today, the synagogue is a cherished part of the historic Bridgetown and its garrison UNESCO World Heritage Property, and the heart of a small but active Jewish community of about 100 people. This modern community is the keeper of the flame. They are not the dominant economic force on the island, which is now driven by tourism and finance. A list of the 10 richest Jewish family businesses in Barbados wouldn't make sense today. But their role is arguably more profound. They are the custodians of a nearly 400-year-old history, representing a second echo of Jewish life on the island, a quieter presence defined by survival, preservation, and community. So, we return to our original quest to find the 10 richest Jewish family businesses in Barbados. And now we know why that quest was doomed from the start. We were asking the wrong question. It assumed a history of accumulated landed wealth passed down through generations, a model that just didn't apply here. The story we found instead is far more complex. It's the story of the Sephardic Jews, innovators who were key architects of a sugar empire. They brought technology and trade networks that generated billions in today's money, but they were held in a golden cage, largely barred from the land ownership, which meant real colonial power. Their wealth, being liquid, was portable, and when the island's economy faltered, they did what their ancestors had always done. They moved. Their fortunes didn't vanish, they flowed out of Barbados, leaving only echoes behind. Then came the second story, the Ashkenazi Jews, who arrived a century later as refugees. They built a new community from scratch and, in an act of profound historical justice, rescued the legacy of those who came before them. What remains today isn't a list of billionaires, but a powerful lesson on the impermanence of wealth and the resilience of people. The legacy of the Mercados and countless others isn't on a balance sheet. It's in the stone windmills still standing against the Barbadian sky. It's preserved in the restored beauty of the Nidhe Israel synagogue. It teaches us that sometimes the richest stories aren't about the fortunes that were kept, but about those that were lost, and the people who, against all odds, managed to build again. This is just one of many hidden stories scattered across the globe. What are your thoughts on the forces that shaped this community's destiny? Do you know of similar forgotten stories? Share your insights in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you found this investigation compelling, please subscribe and press the like button. It helps us continue to uncover the stories that history has tried to forget. Thank you for watching.